In the distant mists of time, a mighty civilization emerged from the shores of North Africa, one that would become a dominant force in the Mediterranean world. Carthage, founded by the Phoenicians around the 9th century BC, was not just a city-state, but a maritime empire whose influence stretched across vast seas and distant lands. At its zenith, it rivaled the Roman Republic, a power that would soon come to dominate the Mediterranean. The story of Carthage begins with its legendary foundation by Dido, a queen who fled the ruins of Tyre, the Phoenician heartland. Escaping from the treachery of her brother, she settled on the coast of modern-day Tunisia, where, according to myth, she negotiated with local tribes for enough land to build the first foundations of Carthage. It was said that she had an uncanny ability to inspire loyalty, and soon, a small settlement grew into a thriving city, a beacon of commerce, power, and innovation. Carthage's rise was fueled by its strategic location along the Mediterranean coast. Its deep harbors, protected by natural barriers, made it an ideal port for trade. Carthaginian merchants sailed from the Pillars of Hercules to the shores of the Levant, from the coasts of Africa to the islands of the Aegean. It was a hub for the finest goods: timber, silver, ivory, grain, and exotic animals. Carthage's navy, unrivaled in the ancient world, controlled the seas, ensuring the flow of trade and wealth. At the heart of Carthage's success was its unyielding devotion to expansion. Over time, its empire grew through the establishment of colonies across the Mediterranean. These outposts were not only vital for securing trade routes, but also to provide the resources needed for the growing city-state. From the lands of Spain to the shores of Sicily, Carthage's reach extended further than any other power in the region. It was a network of influence, where every colony, every trading post, and every strategic fortification contributed to the cities. As Carthage's power flourished across the Mediterranean, so too did its rivalry with Rome. The rise of Rome, once a fledgling city-state, had become an undeniable force on the Italian peninsula. By the mid-3rd century BC, the Romans had conquered much of Italy, setting their eyes on the islands of the Mediterranean, land that Carthage considered its own. What began as competition over territory quickly escalated into a conflict that would change the course of history. The immediate catalyst for the war was the control of Sicily, an island that lay between the two powers. The Carthaginians had long dominated its western shores, while the eastern part was under Greek influence. When a rebellion broke out in the city of Messana in 264 BC, the Romans saw an opportunity. The city's inhabitants, fearing Carthaginian control, appealed to Rome for assistance. Rome, ever hungry for expansion, sent its legions to Sicily, leading to an inevitable confrontation with Carthage. At first, the Carthaginians dismissed the Romans, who were not known for their naval prowess. Carthage, with its superior fleet and experienced sailors, controlled the seas. However, Rome's ingenuity would soon surprise the Carthaginians. Recognizing that naval power was key to victory, the Romans, who had no naval experience, quickly adapted. They constructed a fleet of warships and even developed a new weapon, the corvus, crow, a boarding device that allowed Roman soldiers to board enemy ships and fight in hand-to-hand combat, where their superior military training could shine. The First Punic War, lasting from 264 to 241 BC, was an epic struggle of endurance and strategy. The war raged across land and sea, with both sides suffering tremendous losses. In the early years, Carthage's navy dominated, but Rome's persistence began to turn the tide. The Romans built and rebuilt their fleets, learning and adapting with each battle. Over time, they gained the upper hand, particularly after their victory at the Battle of Mylae in 260 BC, where they proved their naval capabilities. But Carthage, while powerful at sea, faced challenges on land. The Roman legions, disciplined and well-trained, began to secure key territories in Sicily. The Carthaginians, though strong, found themselves stretched thin, fighting battles on multiple fronts. Despite this, the Carthaginian general, Hamilcar Barca, led a brilliant campaign to keep the war alive, striking Roman forces in Sicily, but the tide of the war was turning in Rome's favor. Carthage's desperation reached its peak after the Romans crushed a Carthaginian fleet at the Battle of Ecnomus in 256 BC. The sheer scale of Rome's victory demonstrated that they had not only learned how to fight on the seas, but had become a force capable of challenging the mighty Carthaginian Empire. However, despite Roman victories, the war was far from over. The conflict would see both empires exhausted and weakened, but neither willing to concede. For Carthage, the war proved costly. Its vast resources were drained, and its cities faced economic ruin. Yet, the resilience of the Carthaginian people and their military leaders kept the city afloat. It became clear that a peace agreement would be the only solution, but not before one final, decisive battle. As the First Punic War came to a close, Carthage would face an ultimatum, one that would force it to give up its hold on Sicily and accept Roman dominance over the western Mediterranean. Rome's victory was more than just a military triumph. It was the beginning of its ascent as the dominant power in the ancient world and the first major defeat for Carthage on land and sea. After Rome's victory in the First Punic War, Carthage's humiliation was palpable. The once mighty empire had lost its prized possession, Sicily, and was forced to pay a heavy indemnity to Rome. However, it was not the end of Carthage. Instead, the city began to rebuild under the leadership of Hamilcar Barca, who was determined to restore its former glory. His son, Hannibal, would emerge as Carthage's greatest general and one of history's most brilliant military tacticians. Hannibal's hatred for Rome was deeply rooted in the Carthaginian defeat. As a young boy, Hannibal had sworn an oath of vengeance to his father, and it was this oath that would shape his life's mission. After Hamilcar's death, Hannibal took command of the Carthaginian forces in Spain, a strategic territory that provided wealth and military advantage. Under his leadership, Carthage began to rebuild its strength, and Hannibal developed his vision of confronting Rome directly. His daring tactics included crossing the Alps, an unprecedented military maneuver that would come to define his campaign. Hannibal's invasion of Italy in 218 BC marked the beginning of the Second Punic War, a conflict that would shake the very foundations of Roman power. The Second Punic War was a brutal contest that saw Carthage and Rome locked in an all-out struggle for dominance. Hannibal's daring crossing of the Alps, with his army and war elephants, was a feat that stunned the Romans. Upon entering Italy, Hannibal won a series of decisive victories, most notably at the Battle of Cannae, where he inflicted one of the worst defeats in Roman military history. Hannibal's tactics, using the terrain to his advantage and luring the Roman forces into traps, shattered the Roman legions. Yet despite his success on the battlefield, Hannibal faced a key challenge. He lacked the resources to decisively end the war. While he decimated Roman armies, he could not capture Rome itself. The Roman strategy, though slow, proved resilient. Under the leadership of generals like Fabius Maximus, the Romans employed a strategy of attrition, avoiding direct confrontation with Hannibal and instead targeting his supply lines. Rome's ability to adapt would eventually turn the tide in their favor. After Cannae, the Roman Republic was shaken to its core. However, instead of surrendering, the Romans rallied behind their generals, determined to avenge their losses. Rome's strategy of attrition, employing a scorched earth policy and avoiding major battles with Hannibal's army, wore down the Carthaginian forces. The Romans focused on building new armies, training their soldiers to resist Hannibal's tactics. Meanwhile, in Spain, the Romans focused on cutting off Carthage's resources. Under the leadership of Publius Cornelius Scipio, Rome made significant gains in Iberia, ultimately forcing Hannibal to split his forces and defend Carthage's territories. As Rome's fortunes changed, the pressure on Hannibal grew. He had succeeded in devastating Roman forces, but the war was far from over. The final act of the Second Punic War unfolded in 202 BC at the Battle of Zama, where Rome's new general, Scipio Africanus, brought the war to Carthage. Scipio's military brilliance and understanding of Hannibal's tactics proved decisive. By utilizing the very tactics that Hannibal had once used against Rome, Scipio forced Hannibal into a position where his army was overwhelmed. Hannibal's defeat marked the end of the Second Punic War. Carthage was forced to accept peace terms that left it crippled. It had lost its military power and its influence over the Mediterranean. For Rome, it was the dawn of an empire, having overcome its greatest adversary. Despite its defeat, Carthage lingered as a trading power, though its military might had been destroyed. Over the following decades, the city's ambitions were stifled, and the Romans grew increasingly wary of its potential resurgence. In 149 BC, Rome declared war on Carthage once again, citing Carthage's alleged violation of the peace terms. The final confrontation came in the form of the Third Punic War. The Roman siege of Carthage was brutal. The Carthaginians, under the leadership of Hasdrubal, fought fiercely to defend their city. However, they were no match for the superior Roman legions, which systematically destroyed the city's defenses. In 146 BC, after months of siege, Carthage fell. The Romans razed the city to the ground, and the survivors were sold into slavery. Carthage, once a thriving empire, was no more. Though Carthage was destroyed, its legacy lived on. The city had left its mark on the Mediterranean world through its advancements in trade, agriculture, and military strategy. The Carthaginian navy had been unmatched, and its military innovations influenced Rome in the centuries to come. In the centuries after its fall, Carthage became a symbol of defiance and resilience. The Punic Wars, fought between two ancient powers, left behind a legacy that would shape the future of the Mediterranean. Rome, victorious in the end, would go on to build one of the most powerful empires in history. But the spirit of Carthage, the maritime empire that nearly brought Rome to its knees, remained an indelible part of history. In 149 BC, Rome declared war on Carthage once again, citing Carthage's alleged violation of the peace terms. The final confrontation came in the form of the Third Punic War. The Roman siege of Carthage was brutal. The Carthaginians, under the leadership of Hasdrubal, fought fiercely to defend their city. However, they were no match for the superior Roman legions, which systematically destroyed the city's defenses. In 146 BC, after months of siege, Carthage fell. The Romans razed the city to the ground, and the survivors were sold into slavery. Carthage, once a thriving empire, was no more. Though Carthage was destroyed, its legacy lived on. The city had left its mark on the Mediterranean world through its advancements in trade, agriculture, and military strategy. The Carthaginian navy had been unmatched, and its military innovations influenced Rome in the centuries to come. In the centuries after its fall, Carthage became a symbol of defiance and resilience. The Punic Wars, fought between two ancient powers, left behind a legacy that would shape the future of the Mediterranean. Rome, victorious in the end, would go on to build one of the most powerful empires in history. But the spirit of Carthage, the maritime empire that nearly brought Rome to its knees, remained an indelible part of history. While Carthage as a political entity was gone, its legacy endured through the Phoenician culture and technology it had introduced, from advanced maritime navigation to agricultural techniques that would shape the future. In Rome, the fall of Carthage served as a chilling reminder of the price of empire. Despite their military victory, the Romans were not immune to the complex consequences of war. They saw firsthand the destruction of a once thriving civilization and the costs of unchecked imperial ambition. The Romans rebuilt Carthage under the name Colonia Julia Carthago, and it became a prosperous Roman city once again, but its spirit was no longer the same.